Dear Speaker Nolen, dear Andreas, Vice President Dombrovskis, dear Valdis, distinguished guests and colleagues, it is a pleasure to welcoming you to the opening of the 2023 edition of the European Parliamentary Week. 3 days ago, we marked 1 year since Putin launched his full-scale military aggression against independent and sovereign Ukraine. 1 year of brave Ukrainians risking their lives to protect their homeland and to defend our values. 1 year of global instability as Putin persists in his illegal and ruthless pursuits. Last year, when I addressed this forum, I spoke about the impact of crises on our economy and our response to them. The war in Ukraine was only a few weeks old yet. However, the effects of inflation, energy and food prices had already started to impact citizens and businesses throughout Europe. And I wanted at the time to draw parallels between our response to the pandemic and the one that would be required from us in the face of the Russian aggression. Both were challenges that necessitated a European response. And I believed then, just I believe still, that the choices we will make in the course of this war will prove decisive, both for the current and the future generations of Europeans. Today, I think we can all be proud of the choices that we have made. And I know that it was tempted for perhaps each one of us to go at it alone. Yet we resisted, we defied Putin, we confounded cynics and came together like never before in solidarity with Ukraine and in defence of our values. In doing so, we remained open and frank about the costs that it would have on our citizens. Nevertheless, we managed to find unprecedented ways to shield our economies and societies from the effects of war. The difficult yet necessary step to move away from Russian energy supplies is one of the many decisions that will make our Europe more resilient. A year later, I will not in any way try to underestimate the challenging situation we still find ourselves in, and I remain painfully aware that we have not yet done enough for Ukraine and for our citizens. The war is still raging. We cannot allow war fatigue to set in, because that is exactly what the Kremlin is hoping for. It wants to exhaust our systems, it wants to exhaust our patience. And Ukraine still needs much, much more support. And our citizens need more support too. In this time of global instability, of high inflation, costly energy prices, struggling industries and painful household bills, Europe needs to build on its biggest asset. This year, our single market marks its 30th anniversary. In this time, we have seen more opportunities for people, businesses and consumers than we could have ever imagined. Being the world's largest single and democratic market has strengthened our place in the world. And even in times where our European way of doing things is being put into question, we are still setting global standards, because our way of open societies and open markets works. And we can build on this. We should speed up investment in Europe to put the European economy back on a stable path of growth. 2 years ago, Next Generation EU was our historic response to the effects of the pandemic. 2 years later, it is now also crucial to our responses to the effects of the war. The recent agreement on Repower EU will accelerate the green transition and strengthen the European Union's strategic autonomy. And even after all of this, Next Generation EU funding is still capable of financing more key investments and reforms. We only need the political will to do it. Just a few weeks ago, it was reported that energy and electricity firms made record-breaking profits in 2022. Now is the time to go back, even double down on the idea of a windfall tax on energy companies. And I know that last September, Member States had agreed on a form of a windfall tax, but this will only start applying this year and will be limited in scope. So when we are looking at around €40 billion worth of additional revenues for one energy firm alone, at a time when businesses and citizens are on their knees, it is clear to me that there are far too many still falling through the cracks. The latest forecasts show that the European Union will be able to deploy more renewable energy in the next 5 years than it has in the past 20. The need for this transition is not a threat, but an opportunity. And if we stick to our democratic values and pursue our climate agenda with our tailor-made regulatory framework, I am convinced that the European Union will be able to gain a competitive edge globally. And in doing so, we must avoid the temptation of participating in a protectionist race. We do not need to fence ourselves in. Our economy has grown over the years precisely because we stood for the opposite. Ultimately, our way of doing things works. To achieve this, what is once again required from us is a bold, coordinated and united European response, a relationship which this interparliamentary dialogue has been nurturing for years. This year, the European Parliamentary Week brings together 111 parliamentarians from 39 chambers across 29 European countries. It is particularly special for me to be welcoming the representatives from the national parliaments of Ukraine, Moldova and Bosnia-Herzegovina, including Speaker Denis Zvidic, who for the first time are participating in this forum as European Union candidate status countries. Let me also take this opportunity to thank our colleagues from the Swedish Riksdag, in particular Speaker Andreas Norlén, for facilitating this important conference and for keeping interparliamentary cooperation high on our agenda. By exchanging ideas, we will learn together to find the best solutions for all citizens, ensuring that no one is left behind. I wish you all many fruitful discussions, and I look forward to hearing your perspectives from all speakers and colleagues from all national parliaments and from this House. I thank you. I give the floor now to my colleague, Speaker Nolan. Go ahead, Andreas.
Madam President, Speaker Zvidic, Commissioner, Members of Parliament and distinguished guests, more than a year has passed since Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine started. As we're all painfully aware, the war continues to rage, and it's hard to grasp the full scale of the tragedy. Russia's invasion is an attack on the peace, democracy and prevailing security order of Europe. But Russia's war in Ukraine has not only threatened the stability of Europe, it has also significantly affected our economies. Many households are struggling to make ends meet means, and businesses need to adapt to an uncertain and harsh economic environment. But we must not forget that the highest price for Russia's illegal war on Ukraine is paid by the Ukrainian people. The tragedy of war is painful to witness, with so many destroyed lives, destroyed homes and destroyed cities. Millions of Ukrainians have been forced to leave their homes and to seek shelter in Europe and elsewhere. The war has also imperiled the world's economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, with a sharp rise of inflation, food security, energy security and further supply chain disruptions. These are just a few of the challenges policymakers in Europe and worldwide must tackle. These issues affect all of us, which may also make this conference so topical. It is important that we as parliamentarians from all over Europe can meet and discuss various aspects of economic and budgetary policy which have such great impact on the everyday lives of our citizens. It is therefore also very satisfying that we are being joined here in Brussels today by representatives of the candidate countries and perhaps most significantly by representatives of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine to take part in our discussions. I would like to extend an especially warm welcome to you. We all greatly admire the resilience and bravery of the Ukrainian people, and we are deeply impressed that the Verkhovna Rada has been able to continue its operations during the most difficult of circumstances. This spring, Sweden holds the EU presidency for the third time, and we're obviously assuming this important role in troubled times. Russia's war in Europe will continue to affect almost all spheres of the political agenda this spring. The priorities of the Swedish presidency must therefore be seen against that background. The four priorities of the Swedish government, with broad support in Parliament, are security, competitiveness, green and energy transitions, and democratic values and the rule of law. The Swedish presidency will give priority to continuing economic and military support to Ukraine. This is of utmost importance. The battle of the future of Europe has been fought and is being fought at cities like Kharkiv, Mariupol, Kherson, and hundreds of other Ukrainian towns and villages. When the history of this war is written, it will say that this battle was successful, because it has to be successful. It is simply unthinkable that the free world, with all its might and all its resources, wouldn't do enough. The Swedish presidency will also continue to respond to the climate challenge by bringing forward a Fit for 55 package, accelerate the energy transition, and to address high energy prices. The EU is based on democratic values, and consequently, for the Swedish presidency, the rule of law and fundamental rights are particularly important. Against this background, today's conference is also very timely. As parliamentarians, we are at the forefront. We have the important task of upholding a political system based on trust, respect, and reason. Today, we will first listen to Commissioner Dombrovskis and Secretary General Corman of the OECD, who will give a broad and initiated overview of the economic and social challenges in times of geopolitical uncertainty. Later today, several parallel committee meetings will be held, where members of national parliaments, together with members of the European Parliament, will have the chance to go into further detail on a broad range of topics. Tomorrow, we will gather again for plenary debates on the review of the EU economic governance framework and on fiscal challenges connected with remote working. The review of the EU economic governance framework is a fundamentally important subject, and there are diverging views. I think it is precisely for this reason the debate is so important. It is by putting forward our arguments that we can find reasonable solutions. Just as the framework has been put to the test by the multiple crises Europe has faced recently, so is the topic of the second plenary session tomorrow closely linked to recent events. In the wake of the pandemic, more and more people tend to work remotely, and perhaps from another country than where the employer is based. Cross-border remote working is increasingly creating many opportunities, but the new situation also gives rise to new questions, some of them related to taxation. These issues and other can certainly be challenging, but they are our common challenges. Seeing so many members of parliament come together to constructively take on these issues together gives me confidence and hope. I would therefore like to end by wishing you all the very best of luck in your deliberations and discussions. We are meeting at a time of challenges, but challenges are there to be overcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Speaker Norlén, for those remarks. And now we'll hear from Valdis Dombrovskis, Executive Vice President of the Commission. Valdis, the floor is yours.
Honourable Madam President of the European Parliament, Honourable Mr. Speaker of Swedish Parliament, Honourable members, ladies and gentlemen. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to speak at this year's European Parliamentary Week. It's an honour for me to be with you here today. 1 year has passed since Russia shocked the world with a full-scale military assault on its neighbour Ukraine. This brutal, unprovoked and illegal act of aggression has caused a great deal of human suffering and economic pain. The EU is determined to support Ukraine to win this war, rebuild itself and pursue a European future, a clear choice made by independent sovereign state to follow its own path. We have backed this by granting Ukraine a candidate country status in its bid for EU accession. And we continue to provide financial, military, humanitarian and obviously political support to assist Ukraine. One recent example is 18 billion euros macro-financial assistance package that the EU will provide to Ukraine throughout 2023, subject to it meeting reform conditions. I would like to thank the European Parliament for approving this package quickly at the end of the last year. Your support has been invaluable throughout the last 12 months, with many decisions and resolutions to bolster the EU's efforts to assist Ukraine on every level. Russia's aggression poses many new challenges, just as the EU was setting out on a path of strong growth after the pandemic, not least by dramatically altering the geopolitical landscape. For 1 year, it has dragged on economic activity, fueled inflation, disrupted supply chains, and triggered cost-of-living crisis for many of the most vulnerable. Ukraine's victory in this war would help enormously to relieve the economic pressures both in Europe and globally. The EU was first in line among advanced economies to take the hit, not only because of our proximity to Russia and Ukraine, it's also because we depended heavily on Russian fossil fuels for our energy supplies. We have taken a number of measures to change that situation, including the Repower EU plan, which aims to diversify the EU's energy mix and boost the share of renewables. And the plan is working. There are now more promising signs of Europe's economy, so we are now somewhat more optimistic about the prospects for this year. We have managed to avoid recession, and inflation is starting to cool off after hitting record highs last autumn. Oil and gas prices are lower, helped by our full gas storage and relatively mild winter, with consequently lower energy consumption. We can also see that the price cap imposed on Russia's oil is working successfully. However, we are not out of the woods yet. We still face multiple challenges and great uncertainty due to Russia's continued war against Ukraine. Across the EU, many people continue to struggle. Our companies face competitiveness issues, particularly smaller ones. So we are working to protect those most expected to high energy and food prices. Member States have provided income to support to those whose purchasing power is most under threat and to the worst affected businesses. However, as energy prices fall back, it's now important to properly scale the support measures and improve the targeting of those measures. This is important because continued increases in public spending will fuel inflation and force the European Central Bank to increase interest rates even further. Fiscal policy and monetary policy should not work at cross purposes. Each policy has its own objectives, but we can achieve better results if both of them work hand in hand. So fiscal policies would need to become more prudent. They should prioritize rebuilding the fiscal buffers and underpinning balanced growth. This will put us in a good position to tackle future challenges. Looking ahead, we need to press ahead with designing the EU's fiscal rules for the years ahead. As you know, Member States are now discussing how to make the EU's economic governance more effective in the face of new realities and challenges. We have also held valuable debates with the European Parliament. The challenges of the green and digital transitions, strengthening our economic and social resilience, and the need to ensure our energy security will require us to undertake major investments and reforms for years to come. So it is vital that we have credible rules that ensure public debt sustainability across the EU and sustainable growth. We want all member states to have sustainable fiscal positions using tailor-made combination of fiscal adjustment, reforms and investment. To have a greater medium-term focus based on member states' own fiscal structural plans, better reflection of country-specific public finance challenges in the design of these plans, more dynamic surveillance of macroeconomic imbalances allowing for earlier detection of emerging imbalances. National medium-term fiscal structural plans are the cornerstone of Commission's proposed framework. We want to see a better reflection of country-specific public finance challenges in the design of these plans, and we want to see more dynamic macroeconomic surveillance, as I said, allowing for earlier detection of emerging imbalances. In all cases, a number of clear common EU rules should be respected. The reference values enshrined in the treaty remain valid, 3% of GDP for public deficit and 60% of GDP for public debt. This will ensure public debt sustainability across the EU. Our aim is for all member states to reach sustainable fiscal positions, combining fiscal adjustment, reforms and investments according to their circumstances. We favour allowing member states more leeway to determine their fiscal policies and the right policy combination to bring about a reduction of debt. This should improve ownership and therefore compliance. However, this leeway needs to be accompanied with stronger enforcement in event of non-compliance. At the same time, all member states should respect transparent European boundaries to ensure equal treatment. The Commission will continue to fully support the discussion in the weeks ahead. This should allow us to present legislative proposals shortly after March European Council meeting. As a co-legislator, the European Parliament will be fully involved in the discussions and decision-making on these proposals. So I hope to have your support on this critical endeavour. Honourable members, to secure future growth, we need appropriate policies to reflect changing global dynamics and to support Europe's industrial and economic transformation. We are determined to boost our industrial competitiveness to strengthen overall growth and resilience. Given all geopolitical shifts and risks at the moment, it is essential to maintain the EU's position as a leading global economic player. This brings me to the Green Deal Industrial Plan. It aims to enhance the competitiveness of our net zero industry, support the fast transition to climate neutrality, and make Europe the hub of clean tech and industrial innovation. It is structured around four main themes or pillars. First, creating more predictable and simpler regulatory environment that allows us to scale up development and use of clean technologies. Second, stimulating investment and financing of clean tech production. We want faster and simpler access to national and EU funding, which we plan to achieve by making temporary changes to certain state aid rules. Third, making sure that workers get the skills they need to succeed in the green and digital transition. Fourth, stepping up our trade agenda to open up more markets, access essential inputs, and to help our industry cut costs, create jobs, and develop new products. In the short term, necessary financing is available. We need to make best use of existing instruments, such as the Recovery and Resilience Facility and Repower EU, InvestEU, and the Innovation Fund. A good deal of this financing could be redirected towards clean technologies, helping Europe to carry out a successful green transition with a greater use of renewable energy. Together with revised state aid rules, the RRF will be the primary tool for accomplishing the first phase of the Green Deal industrial plan. They should work in tandem, meaning that state aid flexibilities will be instrumental to the faster and more efficient delivery of RRF funds. And as you know, RRF funds last up to the 31st of August 2026. For the medium term, the Commission intends to give a structural answer to investment needs by proposing a European Sovereignty Fund in the context of review of the multi-annual financial framework, so before summer 2023. This will help to safeguard cohesion and the single market against risks caused by unequal availability of state aid. Tax breaks, tax credits and accelerated depreciation for investments that meet RRF eligibility criteria will help to speed up deployment of RRF funds and make them more efficient. Compared to grant procedures, they involve less bureaucracy for business and public administration. And as you know, US Inflation Reduction Act also makes extensive use of tax breaks and credits. Honourable members, I hope that I have given you a flavour of where the EU stands at this sensitive time in policy as well as geopolitics, and the steps we are taking to cope with today's challenges and those on the horizon. Well, many more areas could be mentioned too, of course, but I know that you are going to have extensive debates throughout this parliamentary week, so I wish you all the success and successful parliamentary week. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice President Dombrovskis, for your introduction and for your insights. Now we will have the opportunity to see and listen to a video message from Mr. Matthias Cormann, Secretary General of the OECD. Please start the video.
Colleagues, friends all, thank you for inviting me to open your meeting today with a few words about the economic outlook. In short, while we continue to pay the price for Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, especially in Europe, the outlook for 2023 is somewhat brighter than what we expected it to be towards the end of last year. The growth in the euro area reached 3.5% in the end last year, and we may well avoid a recession this year. We are in fact forecasting growth of 1.4% in 2024. Europe's resilience was boosted by several factors. In the wake of Russia's war of aggression, the European Union and indeed EU countries acted decisively to diversify energy supplies, reducing the share of Russian gas in overall EU gas imports, down from about 40% before the war to less than 7% at the end of 2022. A mild winter has also helped, making it easier to cope with the disruptions in Russian gas supplies. Businesses and households across Europe did their bit by actively conserving energy. During the second half of 2022, businesses and households reduced their energy usage by a very significant 20%, down to 1,250 petajoules in November, compared to an average of about 1,500 petajoules during the same period in the years between 2017 and 2021. As a result of these collective efforts, gas storage levels in Europe stood at 84% capacity in January, compared to an average of about 70% at the same point in time over the last 4 years. Lower demand and stronger than expected supply helped to reduce gas prices quite significantly as well, down from about 350 euros per megawatt hour last summer to about 50 euros in February this year. These lower energy prices are helping to bring inflation down from its October peak of 10.6% to about 8.5% in January. We still have a way to go in timing inflation properly, but the trend certainly would appear to be our friend. Some of the easing of short-term pressures is of course welcome, but we must also remain focused on our core structural reform agenda and some of the structural reform challenges in front of us to help boost our resilience to any future external shocks. First, we must get stronger growth back on track, which will mean boosting productivity by supporting investment, research, innovation, skills development, optimising workforce participation levels, broadening the uptake of digitalisation by smaller firms, and by promoting competition. Over the past 2 decades, productivity growth has slowed across OECD economies, reaching less than 0.5% annually in the years before the COVID-19 pandemic. The gap between firms at the leading edge of productivity and those further behind should be closed by focusing on reducing regional disparities, investing in infrastructure and skills, and indeed by reducing unnecessary regulatory burdens. Second, we must ensure well-functioning markets through a level playing field and a trading system in good working order, both on the European and the global level. The single market is one of the greatest European achievements and a fundamental driver of growth. The state aid rules that underpin it served the European Union incredibly well in the pre-pandemic era by preventing competition distortions and a race to the bottom through subsidies. These rules should not be relaxed excessively. Instead, Europe should rely on dynamic competitive markets to fuel growth and maximise the opportunities of the digital and sustainable transformations. And it should support a global trading system in which firms compete on their merits, not based on their access to undue advantages such as distortive subsidies or preferential application of laws. This will be especially important with industrial subsidies on the rise globally. The OECD recommendation on competitive neutrality released last year is one useful tool to help ensure a global level playing field by avoiding undue regulatory and financial advantages so that only the most efficient enterprises thrive in domestic and international markets. Third, we must continue to accelerate our decarbonisation efforts, which can improve energy security and affordability while bringing us closer to our net zero targets. This will require the right mix of fiscal and regulatory tools and for countries to share their experiences with one another on what works and what doesn't as they undertake this massive, unprecedented transformation. The OECD's new inclusive forum on carbon mitigation approaches, which had its inaugural meeting earlier this month, is designed to help optimise the global impact of individual countries' efforts to reduce emissions by facilitating data and information sharing, through evidence-based mutual learning, and through inclusive multilateral dialogue. We must also not forget that in the short run, the sustainable transformation will have redistributive effects. Well-designed policies to facilitate workforce transitions and to support regional industrial transformation are key to ensure the opportunities created by the sustainable transformation are widely shared. Fourth, we must continue to seize the many benefits of the digital transformation while better managing some of the risks, challenges and disruptions associated with it. Enrolment in science, technology and engineering education must be strengthened across Europe to ensure the workforce is prepared for the opportunities of the future. At the same time, the European Union will need to continue to show its leadership on effective policy responses to the challenges digitalisation poses for cybersecurity, privacy, competition, tax policy and more. Finally, we must address the impact of population ageing. Population ageing is good news in many ways, but it is also a drag on growth through its impact on workforce participation levels and productivity, and hence, if unaddressed, will lead to lower government revenues at a time of increased ageing-related social and health-related expenditures. There are several tools available to cushion the impacts of this trend. As we live longer, we need to work longer. Later retirement should be rewarded and age discriminatory policies and practices should be removed. Governments must improve the employability of workers throughout their working lives, including by addressing skill obsolescence among older adults. Strikingly, only 24% of older adults participate in training compared to 47% of young adults in OECD countries. We need to drive that cultural change towards lifelong learning, and necessary pension reforms need to be coupled with policy measures to tackle labour force shortages, reduce barriers for older, healthy employees to stay in the workforce, including through lifelong learning and skills development. And we must leverage skilled immigration. Indeed, migration is another tool to help address some of the impacts of population ageing on our economies. Between 2005 and 2015, immigration accounted for 91% of the labour force growth in the European Union. In Italy, over the same period, the labour force would have declined without immigration. In closing, despite the continued challenges in front of us, there are reasons for optimism. Yes, we must continue to address short-term pressures intelligently. We must also tackle longer-term structural reform challenges. Open dialogue and the exchange of experiences will help us to tackle these challenges together, including through gatherings such as this one. I wish you a positive, productive and fruitful meeting. Thank you.
Even if Mr. Corman wasn't able to join us in person, I would like to thank the Secretary General and the OECD for this intervention. On behalf of the Swedish Riksdag and the parliamentary dimension of the Swedish presidency, I would like to conclude by once again wishing you all a successful conference and many interesting discussions. Looking into the program, I am very confident you have interesting days ahead. Thank you, and by that I would like to give the floor back to you, President Metsola.
Thank you very much. Few last words also in terms of what happens next. First of all, thanks for your presence, both to the members of national parliaments, but also members of our European Parliament. Please keep in mind that at 3:30 there will be 3 parallel inter-parliamentary committee meetings that will begin, and ushers will be accompanying you to the separate meeting rooms. Before you all rush off, though, to these meetings, I'll ask you now to have a family photo, and I'll tell my colleagues on the tribune to come down. And by that, I wish you a very fruitful week. Nice to have you here. Welcome again.